Ever feel like you're just stuck on this treadmill at work?
Yeah.
Just churning out feature after feature. It's like, are we even solving problems
Oh,
anymore?
tell me about it. That whole feature factory thing, right? It's a trap, for sure.
Totally. And that's exactly why we're diving into empowered ordinary people, extraordinary products today.
Oh, good one. By Marty Kagan and Chris Jones, right? I actually just finished this one.
Yeah, they've got decades of experience at these like tech giant companies, eBay, Netscape, and they basically lay out this like playbook for building amazing product teams.
And what I really liked is it's not just like, here's what to do. They actually dig into the why, which is so helpful.
For sure. So their first big idea, and we hear this a lot, but they actually break it down really well-empowered teams.
Yeah, it's more than just a buzzword with these guys.
Right. They draw this really clear line between feature factories, what we were just talking about, and teams that are truly solving problems.
And for me, it all comes down to ownership, you know? Like a feature factory just churns stuff out without ever stopping to ask what's the point. But an empowered team, they think like owners.
Totally. There's this great story in the book about this new product manager, right? Totally in over their head, and their mentor's just like, start thinking like you own the place.
It seems so simple, but it's huge, right? Think
Yeah.
about it. If you're an owner, you're not just like checking things off a list. You're invested. You care about the customer.
You've got skin in the game.
Exactly. You're thinking long term about what success really means. So how do we actually make that happen within a team, right? That's where Kagan and Jones talk about trust and autonomy.
Which makes sense. You can't have ownership without those things.
Exactly. They say psychological safety is key. That's where everyone feels like empowered to take risks, to experiment, even to fail sometimes. Because let's face it, no one's innovating when they're terrified of making a mistake.
It's like they say you can't make an omelet without breaking a few.
Eggs, right? Exactly. But creating that safe space, that's where leadership comes in. And that's a big part of the book, too.
Because someone's got to set the tone.
Yeah, and Kagan and Jones, they're big on this idea that the best product leaders are actually coaches. Like, that's their superpower.
So not just telling people what to do, but actually helping them grow.
Exactly. They even have this whole framework for coaching different types of team members, product managers, designers, tech leads.
They even talk about coaching product marketers, which I thought was interesting.
Right. It just shows how important this leadership piece is across the board. And one of the things they really emphasize is building what they call high-integrity commitments.
Okay, so what's that mean exactly? High integrity commitments.
So you know how everyone's always saying move fast and break things?
Bro, yeah. Classic startup mantra.
Right. But sometimes that can backfire. And I think what they're getting at is you got to make sure your teams have what they need to actually meet deadlines without sacrificing quality.
Or burning themselves out in the process.
Exactly. So it's about having the information, the resources, and being realistic about what's actually doable.
So instead of just like blindly sprinting towards a deadline.
It's about making sure everyone's set up for success. And that sometimes means pushing back, you know, even if it's uncomfortable.
Which can be tough.
Oh, for sure. But that's what high integrity is all about. It's about the process as much as the outcome.
Right. It's easy to say yes to everything.
Way easier. But it's not always the best for the product or the team. And speaking of biting off more than you can chew, Kagan and Jones actually tell this great story in the book, a cautionary tale, you could say, about what they call the Pandora prioritization process.
Uh-oh. Doesn't sound good. Tell me more. This Pandora process, it's like opening a can of worms, huh? What went wrong?
So picture this. Every stakeholder, right? Anyone with a budget, they get to throw money at whatever feature they want. Strategy, who needs it?
Oh, no. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Oh, it gets worse. You end up with this roadmap that's all over the place, right? Teams are pulled in a million directions.
Talk about burnout. And I bet the product itself suffered too.
100%. Fragmented mess. And that's exactly what Kagan and Jones are getting at with their third big point. Focus, focus, focus.
It's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind, you know, saying yes to everything.
Oh, the best ideas, they always get lost in the noise. So, what's the solution? Ruthless prioritization.
Easier said than done, though.
That is, but it's not enough to just have a vision. Everyone needs to be on the same page, right? Aligned around a product strategy that's based on real customer needs, not just the loudest voices in the room.
So how did they escape that feature factory madness? Did they have like a magic formula or something?
It's not magic, but it does take work. They actually dedicate a big chunk of the book to this case study, a company called the Jobs Marketplace.
The Jobs Marketplace. Okay.
And they were dealing with this exact problem, growing like crazy, but at what cost? They didn't want to become another feature factory.
Right. Growth for the sake of growth doesn't always equal success.
Exactly. So what did they do? They focused on company-wide alignment. Because here's the thing, you can't have these little islands of empowered teams if the rest of the company's stuck in command and control mode.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Right. Exactly. It's got to be a cultural shift, too. And a big part of that, data.
So they stopped relying on gut feelings and started looking at the numbers.
They became obsessed with understanding their customers, like deeply. What do they actually need? What are their pain points? And the data helped them cut through the noise, you know?
So instead of just chasing every shiny new feature idea,
They could make smarter decisions about what to prioritize. And maybe even more importantly, they could measure the impact of their work.
because data can tell you if you're actually moving the needle.
Right. 100%. But there's one more thing I want to touch on, embracing uncertainty. Because product development, it's not always a straight line, you know?
Tell me about it. More like a roller coaster sometimes.
Right. You can't predict everything, and that's what sets the jobs marketplace apart. They built this culture where those inevitable bumps in the road, those weren't failures, they were opportunities.
They'll learn and adjust course, right?
Exactly. And that all comes down to trusting your teams, giving them the freedom to make judgment calls, to experiment, to course correct when things inevitably go off track.
Which brings us back to empowered teams, right? It's all connected.
It is. And I think what's so cool about this case study is it's not just theoretical. These are real-world examples of how these principles can actually play out.
Because anyone can talk the talk, right? But walking the walk is a different story.
Totally. And that's another thing I love about Kagan and Jones's writing. They're not afraid to get personal, you know? They share their own experiences, their own missteps.
Oh, I love when authors do that. Makes them seem more human, you know?
Totally. Like
Yeah.
they're right there in the trenches with you saying, hey, we've messed this up too, and here's what we learned.
Right, because no one's perfect.
Yeah.
We're all learning as we go.
Exactly. And one of the things that comes up again and again is this idea of building a strong product culture.
Not just about the processes, but like the vibe, right?
Yeah. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, where they can do their best work.
Because when people feel good, they do good work.
100%. And a big part of that is having that shared understanding, you know? Like, what's the vision here? What are we working toward?
Because if everyone's rowing in different directions,
He's going in circles, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be clear, concrete. What's the ultimate goal? What principles guide our decisions?
I like that, a shared compass.
Yes. And speaking of direction, one thing Kagan and Jones talk about is this idea of outcomes over outputs.
Meaning, it's not just about how many features you ship.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in those vanity metrics, like how many lines of code you wrote. But at the end of the day, what matters is the impact.
So instead of saying, we shipped 5 new features this sprint,
You say, we increased customer engagement by 10%. Or, we helped this many people achieve this goal.
focus on the why, right?
Exactly. And they give a ton of practical tips in the book, too, like how to run effective meetings, collaborate with stakeholders, and let's be honest, manage the chaos.
Because let's face it, product development can be a little messy, right?
Oh, for sure. Controlled chaos, maybe.
Yeah.
But even then, those crunch times happen.
And deadlines are always looming.
Always. So they even talk about how to navigate those moments while staying true to those high-integrity commitments we talked about earlier.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Right? Empowering teams, but still holding them accountable.
Exactly. And being transparent about it all. Communication is key. Everyone's on the same page. Decisions are made collaboratively.
No one feels left in the dark.
Exactly. And they talk a lot about leadership in those high-pressure situations, too.
Because that's when good leadership really matters, right?
Totally. And one thing I appreciate is they don't buy into that whole hero leader myth. You know, the one where the leader swoops in and saves the day.
Yeah, it's a fantasy.
Right. Real leadership, it's about coaching, mentoring, creating a space for people to thrive even when things get tough.
So more like a gardener than a superhero.
Love that analogy. They even have a whole chapter on imposter syndrome, which I think speaks to that supportive leadership style, too.
Because everyone feels that from time to time, right? Like, am I good enough? Am I cut out for this?
Oh, totally. Especially in a fast-paced field like tech. And I think by acknowledging that, by giving people tools to deal with those feelings, it creates a healthier, more supportive environment overall.
It's like You're not alone in this. We've all been there.
Exactly. And when people feel safe talking about those insecurities, it builds trust. And that's huge, especially when you're trying to build a high-performing team.
So it's not just about shipping products. It's about building each other up, too.
100%. And that leads to something else they talk about, employee happiness.
Because happy employees are productive employees.
Right. Well, they put it a little differently. They say, and I'm paraphrasing here, happy employees don't automatically equal a successful product, but unhappy employees, they almost guarantee an unsuccessful one.
Makes sense. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly. And they walk the walk on this, too. They talk about the importance of work-life balance, taking vacations.
Which can be hard in the tech world.
It can. But they emphasize creating a culture where people feel comfortable setting those boundaries, and bringing their whole selves to work.
Because we're not robots,
Yeah.
right? We have lives outside of work.
Exactly. And I think that holistic approach, it's so refreshing. It's not just about squeezing every last drop of productivity out of people. It's about creating a sustainable, fulfilling work experience.
Which ultimately leads to better products. Right?
Absolutely. And they don't shy away from tougher topics either. They actually have a whole section on diversity and inclusion, which I thought was really well done.
Because that's so important, especially in tech.
It is. And they emphasize that it's not just about hitting some quota, It's about creating a culture where everyone feels like they belong.
Where their voices are heard, their perspectives are valued.
Exactly. And they offer practical advice for building that kind of inclusive environment, too, like how to make sure everyone feels comfortable speaking up in meetings, sharing their ideas, regardless of their background or experience level.
Because the best ideas can come from anywhere, right?
Exactly. And when you have that diversity of thought, of experience, it leads to more innovative, more impactful products.
That's amazing, right? Like all this stuff we've been talking about, it all kind of fits together. Empowered teams, the right leadership, building that culture.
It's all connected.
It creates this environment where amazing things can happen.
And that's what I love about this book. It's not just a bunch of random tips, It's a whole framework, a way of thinking about building great products and teams.
Like they say, ordinary people can create extraordinary products,
Mm-hmm.
but they need the right environment, the right support.
And that all starts with leadership, right? Leaders who empower, who coach, who get those obstacles out of the way.
Who provide that clarity. And speaking of clarity, there's this one part at the end of the book I wanted to circle back to. They ask this question. It's so simple, but it really makes you think.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
They say, imagine you could only focus on one problem to solve for your customers right now. What would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's so true, right? It's so easy to get pulled in a million directions.
So easy. But if you try to chase every rabbit,
you'll catch none. It's all about focus.
Focus.
Yeah.
And I think that's what separates the good products from the truly great ones,
100%. When you can cut through all the noise and find that one thing, that one problem that really matters, that's when you can make a real impact.
And isn't that what it's all about? Making a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's a great takeaway from Empowered. It's not just about checking boxes and shipping features. It's a call to action.
It's about stepping up, thinking differently, building something better.
For ourselves and our teams.
So for everyone listening, as you go back to your work, back to your teams, remember that question, right? What's the one problem you're going to solve today?
And don't be afraid to dream big.
Because who knows, you might just surprise yourself.
Exactly. Like Kagan and Jones say, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
When they're empowered, inspired, and working together towards a common goal. All right, everyone, that's a wrap for today's deep dive. Huge thanks to expert speaker's name for breaking down Empowered with me.
Always a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep chasing those extraordinary products.